In this lecture here, we want to begin our study of the transformation of functions. And now before we talk about how you use transformation of functions to sketch their graph, what I want to talk about is 7 common functions or 7 functions that are frequently encountered in algebra. And sometimes these are referred to as parent functions. And what we're going to do over this lecture and another lecture after this one, I'm going to break this into two video lectures, is I'm going to show you and talk about the graph of these 7 parent functions here. So this first one here is the constant function, f of x is equal to some constant c. F of x is equal to x is called the identity function. F of x is equal to the absolute value of x, that's the absolute value function. This is the standard standard quadratic function right here, f of x equal to x squared. F of x is equal to the standard square root function. This is the standard cubic function, and this is the cube root function. So what I want to do in this video here is I want to talk about the basic characteristics of these graphs, and then I'll follow it up with another lecture where we talk about basic algebraic transformations on these graphs. All right, so let's start with this one. F of x is equal to c. So this is known as the constant function. This might be something like this. F of x is equal to, this looks like 3/2 here, okay? Or 1.5 here. So it's just the function is equal to some constant number. So the domain of this function is all real numbers, so from negative infinity to infinity. The range of this function is just c. Okay, so for example, the range of this function here is just 3/2. That's it. All right, the function is constant on the interval from negative infinity to infinity, so all real numbers, and this function is an even function. All right, now f of x is equal to x is known as the identity function. Okay, so this one right here, the domain and range of this function is all real numbers. Okay, so from negative infinity to infinity. And this function is always increasing. So remember what increasing means? Increasing means as you go left to right, the function is always going up. So this function, this one right here, f of x is equal to just x. This one is always increasing. And then this function is an odd function. Next, we have the absolute value function. All right, so f of x is equal to the absolute value of x. So the domain of this function is all real numbers, okay? And so the range of this function, okay, so the range here looks like it starts at 0 and it goes up and it increases forever. So it increases without bounds. So the range is just positive real numbers, so including 0. So it's 0, inclusive of 0, sorry about that, to positive infinity. Now this function is decreasing from negative infinity to 0. So as you go left to right, you go down. And then it's increasing from 0 to infinity. So once you get to 0, you start going up. And then this function is an even function. Next, we have the standard quadratic function, f of x is equal to x squared. So the domain of this is all real numbers from negative infinity to infinity. We can see here the range is from 0 to infinity, inclusive of 0, right? So this graph, it never goes negative here, at least for this standard one here. So the range goes from 0 all the way up. The function is decreasing. Again, as you go left to right, you go down from negative infinity to 0. And then once you get from 0 to infinity, you're increasing. And this function is an even function. Next, we have the square root function. Okay, the domain of the square root function, this is f of x is just equal to square root of x, is from 0 to infinity, inclusive of 0. Right, because you can take 0 here. You can take the square root of 0 as 0. But remember, you can't take the square root of a negative number. You get an imaginary number, so you get that imaginary unit I. So the range of this function is from 0 to infinity, so inclusive of 0. So starts at 0, and then this goes up and up and up forever. And this function is increasing from 0 to infinity, because as you go left to right, you're always going up. And the square root function is neither even nor odd. All right, next we have the cubic. So f of x is equal to x cubed. This is the standard cubic function. And so if you're looking at the graph here, right, the domain is all real numbers. The range is also all real numbers. And this function is increasing from negative infinity to infinity. Because as you go along the graph, you're always going left to right, you're going up. And this function is an odd function. All right, finally, we're going to talk about the cubic. So f of x equal to the third root of x is the cube root function. So you can see this is what the graph of the third root function looks like. So you can see the domain is all real numbers, the range is all real numbers, and it's increasing from, it this graph is always increasing from negative infinity to infinity, because as you go left to right, you're always going up. And this is an odd function. So what we're going to do in the next lecture here is we're going to take these 7 parent functions, okay? This cube root, the cubic function, the square root function, the quadratic function, the absolute value function, the identity function, and the constant function. We won't actually do too much with the constant function. And what we're going to do with it is we're going to talk about, what does the graph, let's just take this cubic, what does the graph of x cubed plus 2 look like? Or how about, in parentheses, x minus 1 cubed plus 7? What does that graph look like? So what we're going to do is we're going to take minor transformations to these functions. We're going to add a number here or put it around parentheses and subtract a number. And we're just going to talk about what that does to this graph here that you see down here for each of these functions.